Hi, I'm Kirby Allison, and we love to help the well-dressed take care of the wardrobes. I'm here today in London at the store of Davidoff of London, right off of St. James Street, with 𝗖𝗢𝗟𝗟𝗡𝗖𝗧𝗜𝗍, the proprietor here, and it's always a pleasure to be here. It's one of my favorite places to drop in whenever I'm in London and enjoy a cigar. So thank you so much for taking the time with us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for taking your time with us.
Well, the pleasure's mine. You know, any opportunity to speak about cigars and smoke them, I'll never pass by. So I was thinking, you know, in this video, we could talk a little bit about some of the different cigar brands that you guys have in your humidor, and a little bit about just kind of each's history and kind of what differentiates them for someone that's not very familiar with Cuban cigars or Davidoffs.
With great pleasure, Kirby. Thank you for that. It's a treat to be able to bore someone to tears about my favorite subject, so I'm sorry.
Well, you're in good company then.
Despite the name Davidoff of London, we stock a full range of cigars across origins. So we're not exclusively Davidoff. We have other Dominicans, we have other Nicaraguans, and we have a large portfolio of Cubans, which in this market, i.e. London, is the main interest for our clients. Amongst the Cubans, of course, we stock the full breadth of the portfolio, and the limited editions, the UK regional editions, and other notables that will come along each year's release.
Yeah.
I know you're fond of a 𝗙𝗏𝗏 Lusitania, and you know 𝗙𝗏𝗏 is probably one of our most popular brands, along with Cohiba, along with Monte Cristo, and of course the house brand Davidoff. We do very, very good business on those.
So there's a prolific number of Cuban cigar brands. How many brands in total, or different bands, do they have? Do you know what the count is? I'm sure it's impossible.
We're in the 20s for sure. I should know this as a matter of fact, but certainly in the 20s, possibly 30s. In terms of global availability and global distribution, the big brands are Cohiba, 𝗙𝗏𝗏, Monte Cristo, Romeo and Julieta, 𝗙𝗏𝗏, and then you have what the Cubans loosely describe as more boutique brands, but for most of us they're actually equally prominent and equally delightful brands. Things like Bolivar, Paul Larrañaga, Sancho Panza, Rafael Gonzalez, Vega Robena, Hoy de Monterrey I should have included in the first category, Punch. Many of these brands will be familiar to your US listeners as a Dominican or Nicaraguan brand, but it's important to distinguish that these are the Cubans, and they live in parallel lives. Outside of the US, the Cuban is the recognized owner of the brand. Within the US, it's the non-Cuban, so it could be Dominican, it could be Nicaraguan. They have no similarity except the name, the taste and the blend.
And is there any formality to that business relationship, or are they totally separate?
As far as we know, they're separate. The Cuban industry, it's a state-owned business under the guise of a company called Habanos, and several related companies that deal with the manufacture and the agricultural aspects. There is a partnership with Imperial Tobacco and Altadis, and that's the Cuban side. The US side, I believe, is General Cigars that owns the majority of the other brands, and a few others as well that sit as very large enterprises in the US.
Now, how important is the cigar industry to Cuba?
It's very important. It contributes, of course, many hundreds of millions in actual revenue, and I would say in terms of related or ancillary businesses, this could be principally tourism, and of course the brand value, perhaps, of what is Cuba, many, many hundreds of millions more.
Okay. Any idea, in terms of the Cuban kind of industries, where it ranks? It's probably not the #1 export, but could be. Next to tourism, it's...
For Cuba, it's not quite, but it's not far off. What holds back the Cuban, call it total revenue figure, is not people's desire for the product. It's quite the inverse. It's the ability to supply it onto the global market. Cuba has wisely in the last few years held back on exports and production when the raw materials haven't been to the right quality or in the right quantity. That's why at the moment we see huge shortages in things like Cohiba Behiques and some of the larger format Cohibas, and certainly in limited editions and the like. Not a bad thing, but that will hold back the total revenue.
So they're still constraining. I mean, I guess it's not a matter of constraining deliberately. It's just, being not able to produce, the raw tobacco to increase production.
Exactly right. Reassuringly for us as a retailer, but also as a consumer, you'd be worried if a luxury product could be tapped on and off very easily. In years past, or in decades past, Cuba may have allowed more to filter out than it should have. These days, they are erring on the side of caution. Where the raw materials, it doesn't meet expectation or quality standards, it doesn't get produced.
But that also kind of blends into the brand's exclusivity, is that they are slightly hard to come by.
Indeed, for sure. It's not the exclusive preserve of Cubans, of course. Within people like Fuente, Padron, some of the non-Cuban producers, supply is constrained. In those cases, perhaps artificially, I'm not certain. But whatever it is, the net result is huge demand. And in some of the limited editions in Davidoff, the same story. The Cubans seem to do it rather unintentionally. And that's perhaps the most convincing way to do it.
And London is perhaps the largest market for export of Cuban cigars.
Well, you would think so, judging by the number of cigar shops. But actually, we're a relatively small part of the total export pie for Cuba. The traditional, call it Spanish markets for Cuba are the strongest markets in volume. So Spain, clearly, South America to some degree, Mexico, France, Italy, these are large markets, but mainly because their price is heavily controlled. They're normally state-owned monopolies that reduce or keep tax at a very low level and limit the profit margin of retailers. So in a market, you could sell a cigar for €5, whereas in the UK it might cost you £10, £11. Clearly volume is going to be much higher in those markets. We're lucky in the UK, we're known as a very important market in the quality and of course the history of the Cuban cigar. And it's certainly worth our while to be in business here.
Yeah. Well, great. So what do we, you pulled a tray of a few cigars from your humidor, kind of a representation of some of the Cuban cigar brands. Of course, not all of them, because there's so many. But talk us through, someone that's interested in maybe trying their first Cuban cigar, or only knows one or two different bands. Talk us through some of the different, kind of marks and kind of what makes them special.
With pleasure, Kirby. Not a day goes past when I don't greet someone in my humidor with the question, I'd like to smoke a cigar. I don't know much about cigars, or this may be my first cigar. What would you recommend? Of course, there's a series of questions I'll ask them, but the principal interest is, are they a regular smoker at all? How long do they have? And with those two questions answered, we can guide them towards good selection. Most of what I have here is Cuban, so if they're looking at Cuban, I would look at Hoyo de Monterrey here, or possibly Upmann here, as very good entry-level cigars in terms of the strength profile. The Epicure number 2, which is a Robusta size from Hoyo de Monterrey. That particular cigar has been a companion for many years for me because it's so approachable. The blend is light and creamy. It can be tackled after an easy lunch, or it can be enjoyed after a significant dinner. Very, very easy, very difficult to get it wrong. And I know a lot of customers who feel the same about the brand.
Relatively short smoke too.
It is, yes. 15, 20 years ago, a Robusta was considered a thick cigar. It's a 50 ring gauge. That, although short, would certainly take you 45 minutes to an hour to enjoy it. These days, it's almost a toothpick.
Must be a fast smoker.
Yeah, that's right. But a very popular size.
And is there anything that Hoyo de Monterrey is kind of known for?
Well, aside from the Epicure number 2, the double Corona from Hoyo de Monterrey, back in the day, and this is going back to the early 90s, it was incredibly rare and sought after cigar. After, I believe it was James Suckling in the Cigar Aficionado review, the first one, gave it a 99 rating.
Wow.
And overnight, the Hoyo Double Corona disappeared from everyone's shelves.
Oh, did it? Yeah. It's funny how that
cigar.
happens. But I mean, there's so many different brands. I mean, how does Cuba decide what quality level, what price point, kind of each of these, are pushed towards?
Well, quality is pretty consistent across brands. The notable exception is Cohiba, but in general, it comes more down to the individual importers, the retailers themselves, and of course, a little bit the luck of the draw, but ultimately the box that you're facing that can determine the quality of the cigar of that particular brand you're going to experience. Cohiba is slightly different because the brand is considered the diamond in the crown of the Habanos portfolio. So there's additional care and attention that goes to the selection and indeed the fermentation of the tobaccos that are used. In the old days, all Cohibas were produced in the mother factory, El Higuito. That's no longer true because Habanos has moved towards a diversified factory model where different brands get produced in different factories. They're not only in their mother brand. But still, I would say consistently, Cohiba seems to be the one that delivers on the quality. And
so what does that mean? They're just getting the best leaves and they've got the best rollers?
Yes, but keep that in the context that anything else, it's not that you're getting a much worse cigar. The difference is, on average, you will get a better cigar in quality and construction, perhaps, in a box of Cohiba versus others. But I've rarely had a problem facing Montecristos or Partagas or indeed Romeo Julieta. It really comes down to my job and hopefully the job of the importer in the local market to make sure every box of cigars coming through is of the right quality for the customer.
Okay. And how do you approach that? I mean, whenever I'm in the humidor with you, you're often rolling the cigar in between your fingers. What are you looking for?
That's exactly right. I'm looking for a cigar that will please me and, of course, the customer I'm looking for. So when I'm touching a cigar, I'm looking for obvious signs that there might be damage. It can happen. There could be a break on the wrapper. There could be a break near the head. If that's not there, great, that's a good start. Then I'm touching the cigar to make sure that it doesn't have any obvious knots, gaps, areas where it's been inconsistently rolled. If all of those things are satisfied, then I'm going to be confident that this cigar has the best possible chance of pleasing you.
And that's primarily, the knots are what affect the draw, right? So if you have a tight cigar that's difficult to draw from,
it is.
Oftentimes that's from a knot that's kind of rolled into the filler of the tobacco.
Indeed, it can be a few reasons. It can be poor rolling, so there's actually a twist that's been applied to the filler, because when the filler leaves are put together, they create air channels that will run the course of the cigar. If it gets twisted a little too much by an inexperienced roller, that channel can be blocked. That can be one of the reasons. The other, as you rightly said, a knot, just a poorly stripped leaf, and that knot becomes a blockage. It can be humidity, too much humidity, some cases, very rarely too little humidity. Whatever the reasons, it's very unsatisfying for the customer if you have a blocked cigar. I would always give the advice to our customers, if you buy a cigar from us and unfortunately you light it and you're looking like a supermodel when you're smoking it, please return it. Come back with the cigar. I will replace it for you. It's not your fault. It's a natural product, and we will hopefully rectify the problem.
So what else do we have? We've got...
So if I sort of move along, I'm going to go perhaps in strength profile, and that will be a nice way to do it. Of similar strength to the Hoyo is the 𝗛𝗚𝗏. So this beauty here, this particular one is the 𝗛𝗏𝗏 Sir Winston.
Okay.
Named after, of course, Sir Winston Churchill. It was a size that he's very fond of. It's called Churchill. It's 7 inches by 47 ring gauge. Very easy to remember. It's a 747.
Okay.
That's how I remember.
Was it a Churchill before he became so?
No, it wasn't. The size existed, but it wasn't named after him until, of course, he became such a prominent individual. It's also been known as a Clemenceau, after the French Prime Minister. But these days, I think most people refer to that size as a Churchill. That would give you closer to an hour and a half of smoking enjoyment.
Okay.
And in the 𝗛𝗡𝗟 Winston blend, you will have a lighter blend, but this one develops quite a kick at the end.
Really? Okay.
The final third can be most gratifying and spicy.
And that's as the kind of the tobaccos and the nicotine and everything really kind of accumulate as you smoke the cigar.
Exactly right. Your palate is changing as you're smoking, plus the oils and the natural ingredients that are getting burnt at the start of the cigar are getting deposited further down the cigar. So as you move down and reburn those, that's adding and changing and strengthening the flavor profile.
It's a beautiful format.
I couldn't agree more. The next, for me at least, on strength is these two beauties here. This is a brand called Trinidad. Some people refer to it as a light to medium, some people as a medium. This particular cigar is called the Trinidad Fundadores. Despite the name, many people think it's from Trinidad, the island. It's not. Trinidad is a reference to Trinidad, the city, which is a beautiful colonial city in Cuba. The brand came into existence commercially in the mid-90s, 96, 97. Before that, it was only available as a diplomatic gift from the Cuban government, in particular Castro. And only this size existed, the Fundadores. The band was different, and if you're ever fortunate enough to find the old bands, which is gold with black writing, just pure gold, black writing, they are highly sought after, a delightful smoke and huge value.
Have you ever smoked one?
I have, fortunately, yes. I'm very fond of this shape. This is a size that when Davidoff was being produced in Cuba would have been known as the number one, the Davidoff number one. It then became the Cohiba Lancero, although a little slimmer. Very elegant cigar. Again, it's probably an hour and a quarter, hour and a half to enjoy this. The development you get with a slimmer gauge cigar is quite different to a thicker gauge cigar.
Okay.
With a slimmer gauge, you will often start a little lighter, but you will get more development, in my opinion, even though you physically have less tobacco to play with as a blend.
So you have, I guess, a greater change or evolution of just the profile of the cigar the longer you smoke it.
Very much. And many people think, and it's a truism, that the relative thickness of the cigar means the wrapper leaf becomes a more prominent part of the blend.
Okay.
And I believe that's absolutely true.
And so what's the influence of the wrapper versus the filler?
I mean,
there are different leaves on the cigar plant, or the tobacco plant.
Indeed. It's one of the questions that's been most discussed.
With no answer.
With no defining answer. There's various opinions on that. I'm somewhere in between. I believe, quite correctly, the wrapper is just one leaf, and it's the most beautiful leaf. It's the one you see with your eyes. Okay. It's grown usually under shade-covered fields. Okay. It has a relatively small part to play when you compare the leaves that go into the filler and the binder, which is the rest of the cigar. However, I do believe your eyes are tasting a cigar as well. So the wrapper can influence what you're actually tasting, even without a physical influence there. And then on a thinner cigar, I think it's definitely a component in the physical tasting as well.
It's an elegant format.
Oh, it's beautiful. I'm seeing more and more people coming back to the slim gauges these days.
I mean, traditionally, you were telling me that, 30, 40, 50 years ago, the majority of all the Cuban cigars were the slimmer gauge. It was considered more elegant. Yes. And then, the really thick ring gauge is more of a recent phenomenon.
Indeed. I'll give you a remarkable statistic. I think I've got the numbers right. One of my colleagues in the industry, Simon Chase, who's been in the industry many, many more years than myself, back in the 70s, they made two Robusto sizes in Cuba, the Partagas D4 and the Ramon Elones Specially Selected. That was it. And of the cigars produced and exported from Cuba in the early 70s, I believe it was about 5,000 cigars. Okay. That was it in the Robusto size, globally exported by Cuba in 1 year. These days, in the Robusto size, you're looking at millions. Wow. So what a change. Yeah. And it's probably the inverse with these slimmer gauge cigars.
Do you think more people are smoking cigars these days and were before kind of the war on tobacco?
I don't think so. No, I don't. In sheer volume of people, no, because cigars were, I would say, more widely enjoyed by a wider swathe of the population. These days, we see pockets of growing interest, but it's usually concentrated amongst people who have a new interest in the finer things in life. It could be watches, it could be fine wines, it could be tailoring, of course. And normally you'd gravitate towards the more cultured and the more natural luxuries you can find in life.
But certainly a leisure luxury.
It is. It is, and it's infuriatingly unpredictable. You cannot know with certainty that one particular cigar is going to develop or age or improve in a particular way. You taste a cigar once, you remember that taste, and you're forever chasing that cigar taste again. You may find it, you may not, but that's what we always chase for the rest of our lives.
So that's what keeps it interesting,
For sure.
I feel. The journeys never end. So next we have, I guess, one of my favorite brands, the Bolivar.
Oh, yes.
So talk to me about this.
Well, here we have the Bolivar. This particular one is quite a special Bolivar. It's the Bolivar Belgravia. And you'll note, of course, the secondary band on it, which says Exclusivo Gran Bretagna. This was produced in 2015 as the UK regional cigar for the UK market. 50,000 cigars were produced, boxes of 10. And it's a Montesco size, so that means it's a 55 ring gauge, quite a beast in thickness, but essentially a Robusto in length. It started off a little on the lighter side compared to the traditional Bolivar blend, which, for me at least, is on the fullest, if not the fullest, of the Cuban. Now it's developed and it's got quite a kick to it.
Really?
But,
as it's aged?
As it's aged. It's got 4 years under its belt now, and it's a classic for the future. If you're lucky enough to have a few in your humidor, hold on to them. They will get better and better and better.
Another favorite of mine, the Partagas Lusitanas.
Mine too.
I think you were the one that first turned me on to this.
Well, if I am, I'm pleased to hear that it's a remarkable cigar. The size, it's the Prominentes, which is otherwise known as a double Corona. Different to, of course, the Churchill, although it looks quite similar. It's a 49 ring gauge, and it's just over 8 inches, I believe. Just under, perhaps. The blend itself, Partagas, is, for me, medium to full. And in a double Corona format is an extraordinary expression of that blend. Because of the size, because it's relatively long, you have time to develop the strength and the pepperiness and the spice that is all the things I find in Partagas without being rushed into it. The first third is almost a warm-up. And then you get into the meat of it, and then of course the final third is absolute
magnificent.
heaven.
Yeah, and it's a nice long smoke too, to be really enjoyed on special occasion or good company.
How long does it take you, Kirby, when you're smoking the?
You know, I'm a pretty fast smoker. I feel like maybe it's no more than an hour and a half.
Okay, that is fairly fast. We'll need to improve on our conversation to slow down your smoking.
Yes, well, I don't think. And then last, of course, but not least, Davidoff, which is your namesake.
Indeed.
So Davidoff has an interesting story on that. Traditionally they were manufactured in Cuba until the Cuban embargo, at which time they had to transition their production. Is that right? Or
almost, yes, almost. You're quite right there. The history, or at least the reputation of Davidoff cigars started in Cuba. Zino Davidoff, who was the eponymous founder of the company, had a very famous cigar shop in Geneva. He was world-renowned as an expert in cigars, and of course the way to look after them and the hospitality that came with that. Cuba honored that in the 60s, but this was post-revolutionary, so it was Castro's regime that approached Zino in the 60s and said, we would like to honor you as the most famous cigar man in the world by putting your name on a cigar we make in Cuba. He agreed with certain stipulations, which were it would be in the best factory, by the best rollers, using the best tobacco. And El Eguito, which subsequently became the factory for Cohiba, was where Davidoff was rolled, indeed.
So where was he having his cigars pre-Cuba?
He wasn't. The Davidoff existed. He sold all cigars.
Okay, so he was a cigar merchant.
Yes, he was a cigar merchant and a very famous one. And the majority of his portfolio, because of course at that time they didn't really exist much outside of Cuba, was Cuban. So he sold everything and knew everything. My father's own love affair with Davidoff started with Zeno in Geneva, because when we were in Iran, my father would travel to Geneva to buy his cigars from Zeno. And he started with the Chateau series, which was a bit strong for him, and was eventually given the Davidoff number 2 by Zeno. And that was the cigar he fell in love with. And it's the cigar he offered me when I turned 16 in exactly the chair you're sitting
Is
in
that
right
right?
now, I'd like to say it was only a few years ago, but sadly not. In '92, the last Cuban Davidoffs were produced, and that was due to a disagreement between Cuba and Davidoff on the ownership of the brand. And of course the quality, there was some issues around that. Davidoff and Cuba agreed to divorce, and Davidoff relocated their facilities to the Dominican Republic and continue to be there. Their principal production and factories are there. And they've been producing wonderful Dominican as well as Nicaraguan and Honduran cigars ever since. At the time, it was a big change for cigar smokers, but actually, with hindsight, it was, I think, a very clever move by Davidoff. They grew their market share enormously and expanded into the US market at a time when the US market was really growing as well.
You know, Davidoff, I guess, has been even more successful post-Cuba because it's allowed them, total control over their supply chain.
Absolutely right. And of course, it gave them access to the US market as non-Cuban tobacco wasn't embargoed. And they've been producing wonderful cigars. You know, the most recent one we have here, it's to commemorate their 50th anniversary. And that's the 50th anniversary of the first Davidoff cigar ever produced, 1968.
Okay.
The very first Davidoff was produced in Cuba. And this beauty, it's called the 𝗖𝗚𝗟𝗟𝗡. It's
interesting shape.
It's a gorgeous shape. Comes in a jar of 10. There's 4 varieties of jar, 2,000 of each jar.
All in jars.
All in jars. As you can see, the construction, perfect.
Yeah,
flawless.
It's unbelievable.
It's a medium strength cigar for me. It's got beautiful spice. The tobaccos are around 10 years age profile.
It's quite firm. I mean, it's firmer than...
It is.
It's wrapped firmer than most Cubans.
It is. You know, with Davidoff, because I know how fussy they are on their quality control, every cigar, whether it's rock solid, like a broomstick, draws perfectly.
You're really right about that. I mean, with Cubans, as you said, it's luck of the draw. If you have a box of 10, you could easily get 2 that just don't draw. But with the Davidoff, you never smoke a bad cigar.
Construction is always your friend on that.
I mean, talk to me about this shape. I mean, this is a really kind of interesting format.
It's what we would call a perfecto shape. The name of it is a 𝗖𝗚𝗟𝗟𝗡. You can notice it's tapered on 2 ends. That's actually quite an old shape. And would have predated the straight cigars that we enjoy these days mostly. You would cut only, of course, at the mouth end, but some people will cut into the foot as well to open it up. Otherwise, it can be quite a tight draw initially when you light it. Smoking profile is similar to a pyramid, Monte Cristo number 2, for example, where you will have the advantage of a thick cigar, a lot of blend, a lot of flavor, a lot of development. But in a very comfortable shape in the mouth.
Yeah, that's right. It's a beautiful cigar.
I think a lot of these are going to be put away for future smoking.
Yeah, how long do you think one of these should be put away for?
Well, it's ready to enjoy now, but it's such a collectible cigar. It's been selling out so quickly. I know a lot of people are putting it away with the thought perhaps that their friends in the future will appreciate it even more when they whip it out in a few years' time.
Yes, indeed.
If you enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs up and please subscribe to our channel and turn on your notifications by clicking the bell to the right of the subscribe button so that you can learn whenever we release new videos. If you have any questions or comments about anything we discussed on this video, please ask them in the comments section below. And of course, please visit hangerproject.com, where we have the largest, most comprehensive collection of luxury garment care and shoe care accessories in the world, as well as many other incredible products for the well-dressed. And while you are there, subscribe to our newsletter to receive notifications of new product launches, promotions, as well as a weekly digest of all the videos we publish here on our YouTube channel.